Since I came here in 2006, I mean, it's changed so many times what they are doing, but the owner is still the same. And originally the Death Cafe was just a cafe, it wasn't this big thing. It's a Thai thing where you go and lie in a coffin. Yes, I know. Some people find this strange, but the idea is to reflect on your own death. And if in the Pali is called Maranasati. Marana is the same word as we have for morose or morbid or mortuary. This word means to die. Sati is mindfulness. So Maranasati is mindfulness of death or recollection of death. And if you recollect your own death, it is supposed to reprioritize your thinking. So if anyone here has had times when they've thought they were going to die, it does change your thinking. You know, for example, if you have any grudges and you think you're going to die, suddenly your grudges don't matter so much anymore. Some years ago I had lumps on my neck and a Thai doctor told me it was lymphoma, lymphatic cancer, which it wasn't. But, you know, this is Thailand. I'm not even sure he was a doctor, but there you go. I can't say too much because we're on the live stream. Anyway, I thought I was dying. I thought my number was up. I think I was 35 at the time. And it does change your way of thinking. Like lots of things that you worried about, you don't care about anymore. It gets hard to even like watch movies and things because you can't get absorbed in the story. Did anybody read The Outsider? Remember that book? Albert Camus? The Stranger is also another translation. In the French it was called L'étranger, right? But I think Outsider was the best translation of the title. Has anyone read that? A few people read that. Remember in The Outsider, he murders a man and they find him guilty because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral. So they said he must have no feelings. And then he was sitting ready to be executed. And then his reflection was, if you remember, I can't think of anything more important to think about than my own death. And those were his final thoughts in the cell. I actually reread it a few years ago. I was surprised at how good it was. And if you look carefully at the character in the book, the character is like a personification of mindfulness, because he only is concerned with what's happening right in front of him at that second. So much so that lots of people have compared it to Buddhism, and I thought he'd actually got his ideas from Buddhism, but Joe here told me that that's not the case. And I looked it up, and he was right. Lots of people have compared him to Buddhism, but that doesn't mean that he was getting his ideas from Buddhism. I thought he was getting this from Schopenhauer, who got it from Wagner, who got it from Buddhism, but apparently that link wasn't correct. It's a good book to reread if you want to reread a book or read a book. The Outsider, Albert Camus, one of the classics.
What did you just put together, Schopenhauer and
Wagner.
Wagner got what?
Well, Wagner was a great student of Buddhism. And I worked on a project of Wagner's last opera, Parsifal. And the guy who's running the project said that this is the story of Maitreya Buddha. And so he got me on board. And when I read it, this is it's not associated, it's a carbon copy of Maitreya Buddha's story, but reset with Christian iconography. So we were working on this Parsifal movie, but he wanted to film the entire movie, the entire 4-hour opera, using Angkor Wat, which he had permission for from the Cambodian government, and another one of these places in Cambodia as the scenes in the Parsifal. Parsifal was Wagner's last opera, last published opera. Was it an opera? Yeah. It is an opera, okay. So we worked on this project for several years, but it was like a 10 million euro project. A couple of times he got the funding for it and then it fell through. And so my job was on the storytelling and the interpretation of the storytelling. I have a funny story about it because he invited a top professor a Wagnerian professor called Professor Borkmeier. He was a lead writer for the Wagner magazine Beirut. What is it? Bayreuth? I don't know how you say it. It's the second best Wagner magazine in the world, apparently. And we're doing this thing at the Goethe Institute. And so this Professor Borkmeier was going to speak, then my friend, the film director, would speak, and then I would speak. Well, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it's just like a couple of enthusiasts. And when I get there, there's like ambassadors there, there's royalty there, Malaysian royalty, but still. And then, and then there was simultaneous translation into 10 different languages. And I had a couple of sheets that I'd analysed the character of Kundry for my friend. And they say, no, is that the paper that you've brought? And they yanked it off me and photocopied it and distributed it. And I'm like, no, that's no. So we got up on this stage and we all had to we had three of us, 1 hour talk each. And that's like, I haven't prepared anything. Anyway, Professor Borkmeier talked for an hour and a half. My friend Titus talked for an hour and 3/4. So we were 15 minutes over time, and I said, well, I had a lot prepared this evening, but since we're already over time, I think we'll go straight to questions. And I got away with it. A couple of years later, I was doing the website for Little Bang as we were starting this group up. And at that time, you could see when people linked into the website, and Google would tell you who was linking in. They've stopped it now. Suddenly, I get all these links from Germany. And Professor Borkmeier had taken my so-called paper, my little notes, translated it into German, and had actually published it in this really prestigious magazine. So there I was. That's my Wagnerian fame. They didn't pay me anything, but you know, that's what I was interested in. So yeah, I got published in this thing, and I was famous for a short while in Germany. Okay, we're going to start this evening. This is a meditate with a monk session, so we're going to sit together and try to tap into the group energy, bring our meditation together. So settle yourself into your meditation posture. However you're accustomed to meditating, you're welcome to carry on with that meditation system. For those who are new, I'd recommend you use the breathing as a meditation object. You put your attention onto the breathing. Very quickly, the mind will wander elsewhere. Why does the mind not go where you tell it to go? Very quickly, the mind notes the in-breath, the out-breath, the in-breath, the out-breath. So it thinks, I figured that out. I'll leave the in-breath and the out-breath going, and I'll think about something else. So then you find 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes have gone by, and you've been thinking. At that moment, when you realize you've been thinking, That's mindfulness. That's a moment of awareness in the present moment of what your mind is doing. Re-establish the attention with the breath. It's not exciting, it's not dull, it's quite pleasant. If you put your mind onto a pleasant but neutral object, then your mind will become calmer. If you put your mind onto an agitating object, thoughts about this or that, then the mind will become agitated. It's a simple rule, straightforward rule. The state of mind follows your thinking, like a chariot follows the horses. So be careful with your thinking. Your thinking will determine how you feel. Be willing to give up all kinds of thoughts on any topic that come up, even thoughts that pretend to be important, call for your attention. Teach yourself to patiently, consistently, willingly put the thoughts aside and come back to the breath. This will give you a superpower of not being controlled by your thoughts, of being aware of your thinking as an observer, being able to catch your thoughts and say, no, this is not a wholesome line of thinking. Or no, I will think about this later. For those who are practiced, you can even drop the breath as a meditation object. Simply note when you are aware, when you are not aware, when the mind is present, when the mind is not present. You can settle into that presence so the mind stops going out to any object. The mind stops perceiving things. At this point, the body should become more energized. The mind should become bright. The thinking will become still, centered. The feeling of the self, the feeling of vibrant, energized presence can arise. Your body may feel very large or may condense to a small bright point. These are some of the experiences that start to arise spontaneously when you are willing to settle into the emptiness with awareness. Don't worry if your mind becomes dull or sleepy. Don't think you're doing it wrong if you don't find beautiful states. Meditation is a lifelong project. This breath, 10 breaths, 100 breaths, 1,000 breaths, time and time again, being willing to interrupt the process of the mind, the process of perceiving, recenter, reconnect. So we'll sit together for 20 minutes or so. So make your mind as bright and as sharp as you can. Call into the mind the idea of loving kindness, unconditional well-wishing for all beings. However you can arouse, encourage, bring up this feeling is okay. You may use the words, may all beings be at ease. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering. You may think about those beings who you love and cherish. Hook into that feeling and then spread it or offer it to all well-beings. You may use the idea of praying for other people, or a visualization, offering flowers or happiness or light. Whatever way you can find is valid, just to arouse this beautiful state of mind, unconditional well-wishing, love and forgiveness to all beings, everywhere, in every state. Sabbe Buddha Bala Patta Pache Kanancha Yang Balang Arahantanancha Tejena Rakang Bandami Sabhaso Sabba Buddha Nubhavena Sabba Dhamma Nubhavena Sabba Sangha Nubhavena Satta Soti Bhagwan Tute. So relax your posture. So this evening topic for consideration and discussion, we have just under 1 hour till we finish, is the idea of consciousness, which in psychology is called the hard problem. That's a bit of a joke. In psych, not many people got that. So, for my own personal background here, I went to university in Thailand, to Buddhist university and monks' university. And at that time, there was no courses taught in English, so I had to study in Thai, which was quite something. I chose not to do Buddhism because I figured I would do the MA, which is taught in English and is Buddhist studies. So I was doing my BA. And so I picked psychology. I figured it would be the closest to Buddhism. My old teacher, Ajahn Sumedho, was very down on psychology. He said, more or less, lying around on a couch complaining to somebody about your mother isn't wise. Now, again, that was a joke because if you know psychology, that's not what psychology is about. You might say that's what therapy is about, but even that, therapy now is there's a lot of different kinds of therapy, and lying on a couch talking about your childhood is actually Freudian analysis. It's one school of therapy. And it's discredited for the most part in the Western Anglo-Saxon world. Although I noticed in France and Brazil and some other places, Freudian psychology is still king. But in the Anglo-Saxon world, it was replaced several times by newer and newer theories, cognitive behavioral therapy, behavioral psychology, etc. But, so that's how I came to learn about psychology, was I studied it for my degree, and I found I really enjoyed psychology. It's not lying about on a couch talking about your parents. Most of it is actually research psychology. It's nothing to do with therapy, which these days is called counseling. And these days you would tend to study either psychology or counseling. Counseling would be its own degree and its own course. Not to be confused with coaching. If you study coaching, we used to have one of our group members, she was a coach. She would charge 50,000 baht an hour. It rather annoyed us who had studied psychology, who would get like not 50,000 baht an hour for coaching. So coaching is a different thing. There's a non-psychological movement. So in psychology, the originator was of kind of the first school of psychology, more or less, was Freud. We can certainly argue, and I would go back to Franz Brentano, but that's a whole other lecture. Freud really brought about this idea of a modern idea of consciousness. And in doing so, he changed the way that we think about ourselves. So roughly speaking, psychology is, you have an input from the world. We have senses, we have the world that inputs through our eye, ear, nose, body, etc., not mind. That comes in through our senses, goes through this black box, and out the other side comes behavior. And the question is, why do we all have similar kind of inputs but have a different behavior that is an output? So, I don't know, Joe and Clifton here may have gone to a similar American school, but they're very different people in their behavior. One of them is very nice, and they're both very nice people. So why is behavior different? Well, this black box between the world, our senses, and our behavior, this is the model that we call psyche. And into this box, psyche, we can fit different models that will try to explain why this behavior is outputted. Why are some people diligent, some people lazy? Why are some people want to be engineers and other people want to be parents? Other people want to be something else. Mostly things I don't understand. So there are different models that we can put into this box called psyche. It's important to note that these are only models, because this idea does get forgotten very often. A model is just a handy way that we can, not even explain, we can interpret something, but it doesn't mean it's real. And Freud knew this. So he had a model of consciousness. It doesn't mean it's real, it means it's a handy way to explain behavior. I had this discussion in Sri Lanka with a Sri Lankan professor, and he said psychology has 5 senses, but they are wrong, because the Buddha said there are 6, and 6 is the right number, 5 is the wrong number. It's like, no, it's just a model. And besides, we don't even have 5 senses, we have a lot more than that. We have at least 8. We have a vestibular sense that knows when you're spinning around. Right? So if you spin around and then you stand still, you fall over because you've upset your vestibular, I think that's what it's called, because I have a degree in it. That was a long time ago. It's somewhere in the ear down here. We have another sense of which way is up and down. So if we put you in a dark room and we spin you around, you'll know roughly which way up you are. You have a sense for that. There's a sense called does anyone remember perio something? Proprioceptive. And it means you know where your body is in relation to your body. So if you close your eyes, you can pretty much put a finger on a nose, unless you're drunk, because you know where your finger is and where your nose is. And some people actually don't have this sense. So if they close their eyes, they don't know where their body is. And the only way they can walk is by watching themselves. There's a very good YouTube video about this man. He can only walk by watching his feet. And if he looks around, he has to hold on to something. And he knows where his body is by the weight shifting on his hands, and then he can look around. So we have more senses than 5. It depends how you categorize them. Even the tongue has like a salt sense, a sweet sense. It used to have a chili sense until you come to Thailand and it got burnt out. So I tried to explain to this professor that the idea is it's just a model, but he didn't get it. He said, no, the Buddha said there are 6 senses and 52 Jadasika. There's 52 elements to every mind state. It comes from Abhidhamma. So Freud was looking at the way that the human mind works, and he was a fantastic observer. Even if we disagree with many of his theories now, or we've updated and modernized them, he still had some really good observations. So the idea of consciousness, you feel like you are conscious. Everybody feels like they're conscious, or they don't feel at all if you don't have that feeling. But to put your finger on what consciousness is really difficult. And this is what in psychology is called the hard problem, because we don't quite really know even what it is that we're trying to explain. Freud observed that you tend to have one thing in conscious attention at a time. This he got from Franz Brentano, by the way, who was the originator for Gestalt psychology and also for phenomenology in philosophy. Brentano was very good. He wanted people to observe what's actually happening and not what you think is happening. Most of us, for example, are aware of the world, but we're not aware of the world, really. We're aware of what we think about the world while we're thinking it. So Brentano was a good Buddhist in many ways, even though he was a rather irascible and slightly unpleasant character, as was Freud. Nobody thinks Freud is a holy figure to be emulated. He was a cocaine addict for a start, lifelong cocaine addict. He died of oral cancer from the cocaine he used to put on his gums. So Freud observed that we are only aware of one small thing at a time. So he called that consciousness, what you are aware of. He also noticed that you can move consciousness around like a spotlight. So you can be aware of the scene behind me, you can be aware of this statue, you can be aware of the temperature, you can turn your awareness to the feelings in your feet or the sensation on your tongue. You can move awareness around within a certain field. This field he called the preconscious. Preconscious. So everything that you can be aware of if you put your attention onto it. Now there's some interesting research that goes into this. For example, the cocktail party effect. That's its official name in psychology. Where if you're reading a book, your whole conscious attention is tied up with the book. And there may be people around you speaking or gabbling and you just don't pay attention. But if one of those people says your name, your attention will suddenly and go to that thing. So that idea is that somehow you must be aware of all of this information coming in. Now the question in psychology or philosophy is, where is consciousness? Is consciousness aware of everything, whether you know it or not? So while you're reading a book, consciousness is aware of that person saying your name. That's one theory. Consciousness is everything you're aware of, whether you know it or not. The other idea is consciousness is only what you are aware of. If you don't know you're aware of it, then it's not conscious. This is the other idea in research. Well, Freud said consciousness is what you are aware of. If your conscious attention gets diverted, that happens in a preconscious or subconscious level. You're with me so far, right? I'm not. These terms are very familiar to me, so I can zip between them. I have to remember some people are not familiar with these terminology. So, aside from your conscious attention, your preconscious, where you can, everything you can be aware of if you wish, including your memories. He said there is also the unconscious, the stuff that you don't know about and you don't have access to. Usually we point to the belly for this. In fairy tales, then this is always located in the belly. It's a squelchy, liquid part of the psyche, which in fairy tales is where frogs go. That's why frogs are very important in fairy tales, because they fetch the stuff from your unconscious down in the squelchy, swampy well, but they can bring it up onto the surface of the water into attention. So if you've studied the psychology of fairy tales, that's why frogs are very important, the frog prince and all these stories, right? Now Freud said that all this stuff that lies in your unconscious determines your behavior, but it's stuff that you don't know about and you can't remember. Coincidentally, That's why you have to pay a therapist to try and figure it out for you. And that's where Freudian analysis or therapy comes from. So, for example, we have some cats in my building right now, and there's 2 kittens, and the one kitten is really friendly, and it will come running up to you and like run up onto your shoulder, and the other kitten won't go near you. As soon as it sees a human, it darts out of the way. Why is one kitten and the other kitten totally different behavior? Is this genetic? Well, they're brothers, they're siblings, so it's unlikely. Could be genetic, but one explanation could be that the scared kitten had an unpleasant experience. That unpleasant experience has got lodged in its unconscious and now determines its behavior. Even though it can see the other kitten getting food treats, it hasn't figured out that it can do the same. That may be why you're afraid of spiders. Maybe. Say, other schools in psychology would disagree. But if you had an experience with a spider when you're young and your brother or somebody screamed at a spider and ran in terror, you may have picked up that fear. You can't remember that incident, but it's now in your unconscious and it governs your behavior. Do you know where the largest spider in the world is? I think the largest one may be the crab spider, but the largest in one way of measuring it actually is in South Wales. Really. They're quite rare, but they're huge. And I was in South Wales when I was like a tiny little kid, and I went screaming into my parents' room like, Dad, there's a spider in the room. And he said, just ignore it, it won't hurt you. I'm like, no, it's enormous. And he said, it's not going to hurt you. And I was just screaming and screaming, and then he took his shoe off and he comes into the room, and the spider's about that big. He's shooting out of the room. Really, it was like huge. So, is that why I'm afraid of spiders? That would traumatize anybody. Many psychologists don't agree with this now, but this was Freud's idea. The stuff in your unconscious, the things that have happened to you, especially as a child, are determining your behavior now as an adult. So the idea of therapy in his mind was to delve into your unconscious mind by things like word association or dream analysis, to try and find that trauma in your unconscious, bring it up into the conscious mind where you can have what is called catharsis. That's where the word catharsis comes from. It gets misused these days, but that was the original idea. So he had a patient who had a morbid fear of water, of drinking water. And then one day she sat there and there's a glass of water on the table, and she suddenly remembers as a child she'd seen a glass of water and a dog had come and licked the water, left, and then her mother had come and drank the water, and that was disgusting. And once she remembered this, she lost her fear of water, so she drank the water. And Freud was like, well, this is great. I've gone into her unconscious, I found the problem, we've had a catharsis, and now she's cured of the problem. You may disagree with this kind of philosophy, but so that was the Freudian idea of consciousness, that we have these 3 levels of consciousness. He pictured it like an iceberg, like only the tip is visible above the water. Slightly below the water you can see, but underneath the water is the stuff that you can't see. But remember, this is a model, and models aren't real. Models are just a handy way that you can try and interpret experience. Even Freudian psychologists got this mixed up, and they tend to often think, no, this is real and this is true, rather than this is a tool for trying to explain behavior. I have some good examples of models. There are three kinds of people in this world: those who are good at maths and those who aren't. Come on, that's pretty good. There are two kinds of people in this world: those who can extrapolate from incomplete data, I'm sure not everybody's getting that joke. There are two kinds of people in this world, and you should avoid both of them. So that's just a way to model the world. People is a way to interact with people. You have a kind of working model. It doesn't mean the model is real. So in the same way, Freudian consciousness model doesn't mean it's real. It's a handy way to think. Now, as far as Buddhism is concerned, it follows Freud's idea in the conscious and the pre-conscious. But in the model of Buddhism, we don't have an unconscious. So this idea of going back to childhood and childhood experiences or analyzing your dreams has no part in Buddhism. And this is where, I think I mentioned his name, but my former teacher was misinterpreting psychology, because he's thinking, well, that's unconscious is where is what is happening in Freudian psychology. Buddhism doesn't worry about the unconscious mind. We don't really care what happened to you as a child. Now, you may go and do therapy, that would be fine. It's just that's not the Buddhist model. That's not what you're doing in meditation. So the other thing that consciousness is not in Buddhism is a level of your awakeness. So we often have this idea that while you're asleep, you're unconscious. Or while you're in a coma, you're unconscious. Maybe while you're asleep, you have very weak consciousness because you're only dreaming. When you wake up, you just have a bare glimmer of consciousness until you have your coffee. Then your consciousness, boom, comes up until you get to work, and then your consciousness starts to disappear again until 5 o'clock. Sometimes I pause because I think of jokes or stupid comments, and I think, no, I better not say that. So that's kind of the idea that we have of what consciousness is in society, is some kind of level of wakefulness or alertness. That certainly is a pretty good scale and can be used, and psychology does, in fact, work a lot with analyzing dreams and dream states, etc. But as far as Buddhism is concerned, we don't care about when you're not awake and aware. Meditation and Buddhist practice starts with what you are conscious of in this present moment. Even pre-conscious, what you can be aware of if you choose, is not important. What we are interested in is where the attention of consciousness is landing at this moment. That's why the word in consciousness, the word for consciousness in Buddhism is vijnana. Vijnana. And it's always translated as consciousness. I think it should be translated as cognizing, cognition, because it is the object that you are cognizing right now. So please be aware of that in Buddhism. Sometimes our translations are not the best translations, but we're stuck with them. What we're interested in is where attention is landing right now. This is what the meditator is observing. Now, your level of alertness may rise and fall. Often in meditation, when you start, your alertness is high, your alertness will dip, and you'll slip into a dream state. Have you experienced this? The mind just kind of bobs along and thinks about dinner and thinks about a movie and thinks about something you want to do, and then like 15, 20 minutes have gone by. I get this all the time. I'm terrible for this. I've been thinking about writing the next James Bond movie. I have these kind of thoughts, and sometimes it gets carried away, so I have all these scenes written out. Of course, I'm never going to write it, and if I did, nobody would listen, but there you go, I have fantasies. And I'm gone. If it comes into my mind, I'm gone. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. And then it's effectively a dream state, because my mind is just boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, moving around. If it's directed, that means I know there is a topic I'm thinking about. If it is undirected, the Pali word is sasankarikang and asankarikang. If it is undirected, the mind just free associates from this topic to that topic, thinking about a movie, thinking about dinner, thinking about sleep, thinking about my cat, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about my childhood, just dotting around like free association. Then the mind is not directed. It is important to the meditator to know which state you are in, directed or undirected. If you're in undirected, you really need to use some meditation techniques to arouse attention. It's up to you how you do it. Visualizing light is very good. Sometimes using a strong mantra can be very good. One time in my meditation, I resorted to slapping myself in the face. It's true. I'd sit there and because I have all day to meditate, so I don't put in much energy, because if I don't do it now, I'll do it in an hour or later on this evening. And then my mind is gone. And then I'll be like, 10 years as a monk, and this is all I can do. And I was getting really angry with myself, but that anger, at least it woke me up, puts me into the directed thinking. I know now where my mind is going and what I am thinking about, and whether I want to think about it. Of course, you have to think about stuff. You can't live your whole life not thinking about things. But in this hour, this meditation, you have to train yourself to put aside the thinking. This is really important. And it's something that my teachers didn't tell me, and I want to tell to you. Because they were teaching me the wrong way. They were saying, be aware of your thinking. Know what it is doing. Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you greedy? Are you hateful? And this arouses wisdom. But what is the wisdom that arises? One layer of wisdom is there are wholesome and unwholesome thoughts. There are some thoughts that will lead me into happiness, and some thoughts that will lead me into depression. If I think about the things that hack me off, it will lead me into a depressive state. That depressive state then interprets everything that happens in a depressive way, and everything becomes more annoying, and it gets into a cycle. Those of you who have experienced depression know this. You have to watch your thoughts. If you focus on the things that are wholesome, there's no blame in that, but the thinking will make you tired. If you're tired, you will not concentrate. This, by the way, is in the Deveda Vittaka Sutta, one of the central teachings of the Buddha. So I'm no longer talking about Freudian psychology. This is pure Buddhism, the way the Buddha actually taught it. This idea of just watching your mind to have wisdom arise is not right. The first wisdom is to know what is wholesome and unwholesome. But the next layer of wisdom is to know that I can put aside all thinking altogether. That was what the Buddha says in the sutta. He said, when I realized, he says, when I realized that even the wholesome thinking will make my mind tired and unable to concentrate. I abandoned it. I cut it off. I made an end to it. With my mind then bright, purified, and wholesome, I turned my attention to attaining to the jhanas, the concentration states. Once those states are attained to, I turn my mind to the knowledge of arising and the passing away of karma, self, and the purified mind. Basically, three vichar, the three methods. If you know Buddhist history, you'll know that the Vedic teaching at the time, they had three Vedas. So I think the Buddha introduced the three vichars as something of like a pun, but as a way to bring people from that teaching into this teaching. So, the thinking has to stop. Where consciousness lands, that will spark a state of mind or perception. If you put your mind right now onto the feeling in your stomach or the memory of your town where you were born, can you do that? It comes up into your consciousness, right? Because you've called it there. In Freudian psychology, the town where you were born is in your preconscious. It's accessible if you wish. But you have to will it. Once you will it, that comes up into attention. As far as Buddhism is concerned, whatever you put attention onto, that will spark perception. Once it's sparked up, fired up, you think about that town where I was born, that secret passageway this is true, by the side of my house that went down to this like river which had like a secret little way to cut through the whole town. This is my childhood. That's now sparked up and has become my topic of thought, directed thought. What happens if I stop putting my attention on anything? If I don't call anything into my perception, into my current conscious awareness? First thing that happens is your level of consciousness in terms of being awake will start to diminish and you'll fall asleep. And you'll sit there like this, doing your meditation, sometimes swinging around. And used to be a Ajahn, one of the abbots in England. He used to swing violently with his head as he meditated. I shouldn't say his name. But it was a very small room, so we had to sit close together, and sometimes you'd feel the whoosh as his head would come past you like this. Yeah, he disrobed in the end. But so conscious awareness, as in your alertness, will diminish, but after a while you will feel these moments when suddenly, boof, your awareness will return. And you have a moment before you point your awareness at something. You have that moment of just pure awareness. That's what you're trying to catch. That's catching lightning in a bottle. That moment of brightness, alertness. If you catch that, you don't need any other meditation object. If you get near it, you start to feel more holy. For example, if you walk on a beach and you look at the stars and your mind goes quiet and then you get awed by the majesty of the universe, just for a moment your mind stops doing stuff. You're still perceiving, but you're getting closer. You can do this in a church. Depends on your associations. I always had a negative association with churches. They felt, I don't want to say evil, but the only church I went to was with my school. They had these like evil, I think gargoyles or something. They're like figures carved into the stone, and they're really creepy. And I was like wigged out by the whole experience of a church. There's a particular experience happened too, which was rather unnerving. And it was only years later that I could actually go into a church and feel the majesty of it. That's why they built churches high. Imagine being in the Middle Ages. It's very difficult to build a tall building because they collapse. If you go into my temple, Wat Pak Nam, and you look down the wall, I always show people when they come in, one of the walls is actually bowed in by about 1.5 meters. And when you look at it, you feel like, whoa, it's going to crash. And the other opposite wall is bowed out. It's hard to make a tall building in the old days. So churches, huge, tall, stained glass, the lights coming in, they were built to awe, to make your mind go quiet, stop you thinking. So the more you can come to this, the closer you get to the right experience. This is now when you're meditating, is leaving the meditation object, like counting the breaths or visualizing something, and just stops with that moment of lightning. It's bright, it's clear, it's sharp, it's aware, it's awesome. It energizes the body. Don't worry if your meditation isn't like this. I'm giving you the information because my teachers never told me these things. And for years and years, I was watching my thoughts. They say, well, making your mind one way isn't wise because you never learn anything, but watching your thoughts, that will arouse wisdom. You have to step beyond the thinking mind. Otherwise, you will always be trapped in the thinking mind. You may clean your thoughts up. Good thoughts are better than nasty thoughts. You may watch the pattern of them or how somebody triggers certain thoughts and feelings. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom from observing. But the true attainment in meditation is when you step out of the thinking mind altogether. Then you start to really get the, let's say supernatural, but super mundane experiences where things can really like change and shift for you, and you have the clear understanding you're going into something new. I'll finish off by exemplifying this idea. One of my favorite fairy tales, Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin, the farmer's daughter, had been captured by the king and had been told to spin straw into gold. She couldn't do it. An evil little creature came and did it for her, but made her promise her firstborn child to him. This goes on for a little bit, but the crux of the story is Rumpelstiltskin now has control over the princess and her firstborn child, unless the princess can find out his name. Now, your real name is your real nature or your real self that was there before you were born. This you will feel spark up, but only when you step long out of thinking. So in the fairy tale, the messenger who finds out the name of Rumpelstiltskin, he has to go out past the forest, past where the fox and the hare go to sleep. Now, in Christian mythology, the fox represents the thinking mind or intellect. The hare, which is like our rabbit, not the hair on the head, represents imagination. So the fox and the hare going to sleep means the mind has stopped. The imaginative aspect and the intellectual aspect have both stopped. Then the messenger can go into the forest and he sees the fire. This fire is your self. Leaping around this fire then is a little gremlin that says, she'll never find out my name is Rumpelstiltskin. And he goes and reports to her. She says it, and then Rumpelstiltskin stamps the ground very hard and it cracks and it swallows him up. Or in another version of the story, he jumps onto a ladle and flies out the window. And the ladle is the stirring the pot, right? Stirring the pot in the mind. Rumpelstiltskin is this aspect of the mind. Comes from the thinking, from the stirring up. So, in the fairy tale and in our meditation, the true resolution comes when we've gone beyond the place where the intellect and the imagination are working, when the mind has stopped, but is bright and is clear and is aware. These are the states that are what we call the mystic states. So that's what the mystic side of religion, all religions, is pointing to. So I'm going to stop there and check if people have any questions or comments.
What's your take on plant consciousness, if you're aware of it?
Yeah. How are plants conscious? Are plants conscious? And I'm afraid I have to give you the only answer that's possible. It depends what you mean by conscious. So it's an easy get out of this question. Plants don't think. Plants are aware of the surroundings. Is that conscious or not? If a sunflower tracks the sun, do you say it is conscious of the sun or not? This really just depends on whether you define it as such. However, I don't think a plant can become enlightened. I don't think a plant can meditate. I don't believe a plant has the ability to move conscious attention around onto things. I don't think a plant is any more conscious than a solid object, than a rock. A rock also reacts to its surrounding. Consciousness, by pretty much any definition that we have, is when attention is put onto something and it comes up into a conscious, perceived awareness. So I don't think plants have that. However, every so often there's a meme that goes around that says, this young girl, every day she would water this plant and swear at it and shout at it, and you water its brother plants and say lovely things to it, and look, this plant is all big and green and bushy, and this one is all scrawny. The only time I've seen that experiment actually done by a scientist, it hasn't made any difference to the two plants. However, you will see memes about that. It may be true, but I doubt it. There was a Japanese guy, he experimented on water crystals, right? Remember this? And he taped words like love or hate or beauty or ugly or some things to a pot of water and left it there. And then he tested some crystals in the water, and then he showed these pictures of where the nice words were. There was these lovely crystals. There's a lot of people debunking that. And then there's people who believe it, who debunk the debunkers. So, personally, I don't think so. They may react in some way, I don't know. I knew somebody who said that she can feel crystals. She'd put things in her hand and then she'd tell you about it, like this has a green energy, or this has a calm energy, or this has a something, but I don't know. I'm too practical. I just like, well, it's heavy or it's cold. So maybe my chakras aren't open to this stuff. I don't know. I just want to do an experiment. It's like have 5 things and ask her what it's like, but not let her see them, and then come back a month later and give her the same 5 and see if she got the same answers. But she wasn't willing, so. Any other question? Comment?
Also, for me, it's not clear yet what the difference is between Freudian
So he's not clear of the difference between the Freudian model and the Buddhist model.
Well, and one other addition, I guess that Freudian wants to explain something in the world, but maybe Buddhism has another objective, studying consciousness.
Right.
Does that have anything to do with it?
So he said maybe Freud is trying to explain worldly things and Buddhism isn't, which would be right. So in Freudian psychology, the key thing that you're interested in is the unconscious, not subconscious. That's different. Subconscious is not really in Freud, but what you're interested in is the unconscious, the things that you can't remember, the experiences that have happened to you in the past that now govern your behavior, but you can't remember what the experiences were. And Freud wants to get into your unconscious and fix it or bring it out to conscious. And that's what therapy it's called analysis, is a Freudian style therapy. That's what they're interested in doing because they want to solve your problems, fix your neuroses. Buddhism doesn't really care. Buddhism says fix your behavior by taking precepts, by being of a good moral standard. That will clean up your karma very quickly. Don't worry about what happened in the past. This is an important point people misunderstand about karma. In Buddhism, karma is always what you do now affects your future. It was never what you did in the past affects you now. That's a totally different idea. If what happens in my past affects me now, I have to fix my past, which doesn't make much sense, unless you're Freud, maybe. But what I do now affecting my future, that puts all the onus on you. You now have agency. If the past affects me, it's like, well, if I'm a reader or an unpleasant person or a thief, it's my past doing it to me. It's not my fault. But what I do now affects my future. That makes you the agent. So it's important in Buddhism, we're always future orientated, not past orientated. So that's the big difference between psychology, Freudian psychology. I should say cognitive behavioral therapy has the same idea. It's focus on how you perceive now and what your behavior will be. It doesn't care about your past either. So the difference between the two, Buddhism has no concept of unconscious, doesn't care about your unconscious. Vaguely it says, yes, you have a karma, comes from the past, but we don't care about that and you can't fix it. We care about my actions now, which will determine my future. So Buddhism is only concerned with where conscious attention is right now and what happens if you stop perceiving things consciously. What happens, that conscious actually becomes self-aware or self-referential, awareness of awareness. It's actually awareness of yourself. You find your actual self, like the Muji, if you know him, calls it the white fire. And it's like that. It's this bright light, energetic flame that courses through you. And you're like, oh, that's me. But your mind isn't thinking. It's not like a psychological me. It's not me with a past or a future or a psychology. So that's what Buddhism is interested in. Conscious attention lands on something and fires up these states of mind. What happens if you bring that process to a stop? It's really important. Vipassana systems these days continually tell you be aware of your thinking, like see what you're thinking, and you have to step outside your thinking, otherwise you will never know these mystic or union states.
More questions?
50,000 baht an hour, I'll do one-on-one conscious training. In fact, I'll do it for lunch.
Just a little curiosity for me. You mentioned about daydreaming
Well, people are chased by their thinking, but more so the conscious or directed thinking than the unconscious thinking. The daydreaming state is your thoughts are just bobbing around, but you're wrapped up in them. But they are not really chasing you. The thoughts that chase you are your ideas and fears and wants and neuroses and things. These thoughts will come and hound you and harass you. And they operate by habit. The Buddha said, and I think school children should be taught this all around the world. It's one statement of the Buddha. To what a man thinks and ponders often, there is a leaning in his mind. So what you think of and ponder on often, your mind will lean into that thing. So right now, if I relax my attention, I start thinking about this stupid James Bond movie I want to write. I'm leaning into it because I've given this attention in the past. So be careful. What does your mind lean into? Into depression or love or nice states or unwholesome states? We should know. I saw the same idea. I went to see Saint Teresa. She's not a saint, is she? What's her name? Mother Teresa. That's better. Saint Teresa was 15th century Spain. So, Mother Teresa, she actually put her hand on my head. I was hoping to feel like a bing. I just felt. Anyway, it was nice. She gave me some amulets. What was I going to say? Oh, in her monastery was written on the board something. It doesn't come from her, but she'd obviously liked it and written it up. Said, sow a thought, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. So that's the same idea. Be careful at the level of thoughts, because this starts to determine who you are. So that's what we need to be aware of, those thoughts that chase you. And if you are meditating and you are accustomed to stopping that process, the thought comes in, it entices you, you want to think about it. That wanting is attachment. When Buddhism says let go of attachment, it doesn't mean don't feed your cat or look after your children. It's that attachment that lures you in. If you are accustomed at breaking that, interrupting that cycle, you gain power over your thoughts. It's incredibly freeing. By the way, the words becoming a master of the ways of thought is one of the Buddha's own statements. One becomes master in the ways of thought. He thinks what he wishes to think. He does not think what he does not wish to think. And he's able to step outside of the thinking altogether. Yeah. It's important, I think, there's a difference between Buddhism, which is all the teachings, and the actual mystic experience, to move out of the teachings and into the actual direct experience. And this mystic experience, is not Buddhist or Zen or Advaita. It's actually real. It's you. You can see it and know it without any question. Now, what you think about it after that then goes according to your religion.
The last quick question.
She says don't talk too long.
You mentioned the jhanas both this week and last week, and I noticed in the U.S. in Vipassana circles, the jhanas get mentioned almost not at all.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have any thoughts on why that is, and your thoughts on how is it important to attain the jhanas to get to where you want
Right.
to go.
So the question is about jhanas, which is absorption meditation. Why, especially in West, but also in other schools, why are jhanas no longer taught or mentioned? And the last part was, should you practice them, and is there a point where you put them down and do vipassana? So, in brief, the Buddha taught relentlessly, provably, throughout his teachings that you should practice concentration meditation. Any school that says you shouldn't is categorically wrong. Now, they may be attaining to something, or they may be getting enlightened. But the suttas, the teachings that we have, say practice concentration meditation to jhana level. That cannot be denied. It's provable. That's what it says. Somehow, it's not enough time to go into how, but somehow schools got into this idea, well, the Buddha practiced concentration in his early days. It didn't get him enlightened. Then he did ascetic practices. That didn't work. And then he got enlightened. So they say, therefore, don't practice jhana, absorption, concentration. But they're wrong. Throughout the suttas, the Buddha recommended to his monks, you should practice concentration meditation. Jhana and vipassana were not separate. In fact, vipassana should come after jhana. At no point in the suttas does it say vipassana, insight, comes before jhana. Now, in terms of insight, from day one you start getting insights into your mind, into your behavior, hopefully. So in that sense, vipassana can start from the beginning. The insight that you have should be into the suffering of the way the mind picks up objects. The attainment is when the mind stops picking up objects of attention. You can go into jhana, concentration, but note, in concentration meditation, you still have an object of perception. So if you concentrate on the breath, you may attain to deep concentration on the breath, but you still have an object of attention, of perception. It's the breath. So concentration will only get you so far, because it never steps out of this system of perceiving objects. What the Buddha said was, after you've made the mind bright, still, wieldy, ready for work, he used this word, then you turn the attention to the attainments, which aren't focusing on an object. So, you have to practice, you have to go through jhana in your practice, concentration, meditation. You have to give up that jhana and go into objectless concentration, which is also called concentration, but ekagata, which means one-pointedness, or ekabhava, literally becoming unified. The mind becomes unified. So that's the path that we're on, in short. Why so many schools teach not to do this? I don't understand. And I was led that way myself, and I practiced the wrong way for a long time. Also, deep concentration is tricky and can be frustrating. So some people can come and try and practice, and they want to get these states, and then they fail. And then they say, well, they give up the practice. So that can happen too. So there are all kinds of pitfalls, but yeah, you have to do it. So we're going to wrap up for this evening. I will be back here next week, right? I'm on next week. Topic next week. You should know this, in the news. Saving Snow White. So, saving Snow White. Because Snow White is being destroyed by these woke Disney writers who are obliterating the whole point of the story of Snow White. So, I'm going to talk about the Dharma of Snow White and how that relates to the way that the mind works in the original fairy tale.